Hi, it's Eric Arno. I'm here on December 2nd, 2025, and today is a fateful day. This is the day that Albert Einstein and roughly 20 other Jewish luminaries, you could say, of the Jewish community back in 1948 sent a letter to the New York Times, and I want to talk about that. So, just as a little bit of background, I recently was having coffee with a new acquaintance of mine, and some of the questions, the word Jewish came up. And as soon as I said Jewish, he immediately kind of tensed up and he thought, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? And because the Zionist narrative that has taken over the info space, so to speak, is so overwhelming that it really kind of it scares a lot of people. Let's put it that way. And because I do come from a Jewish background, four of my grandparents were all Jews from Eastern Europe, and they all came over to the United States, essentially to escape persecution of one form or another. Um, I'm pretty familiar with this whole problem, and also I went to a Jewish summer camp, a Zionist summer camp for 11 years. So I also read the book Exodus by Leon Uris, which is a what can I say? It's a pro-Zionist exposition of how the state of Israel was created, and of course there was a movie made out of it. So there was a huge, a propaganda push basically to push the state of Israel, and for years, the American public and especially the Jewish public have bought into that. Now, when I was going to this summer camp, one of the main issues or the main themes was, us poor Jews and everybody hates us. And I was thinking, well, we're not the only ethnic group that's had problems. The Native Americans, they were completely wiped out. It's not like the Jews were completely wiped out. If they were, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But there have been, massive genocides throughout the world for the past, especially the last 500 years, if not earlier. Another situation came up, which was interesting for me. Was this is when I was traveling back over 10 years ago, and I was in China, and I was on a train, and it turns out that I ran into this guy who I had met, an Israeli who I had met in a monastery in northern Thailand. And here we are. We're all, four people, four Westerners, and I think every one of them happened to be Jewish, or at least come from a Jewish background. But in any case, this one particular guy is from Israel, and he had been in the IDF. What was the word? Intelligence service. So he worked for the Israeli Defense Force, so-called Defense Force intelligence aspect of it. And he said that as far as he could tell, Zionism was just a tool of the people running Israel to keep control of the people of Israel and broadly speaking, the entire world practically. So, and of course, in subsequent, that was in this, we're talking like back in 2010 or something like that. So I've been familiar with this problem for quite a long time. And in the recent situation that's arisen where there's an obvious genocide going on, I felt like I needed to address that issue, especially because there's a huge problem within the Jewish community, which is that there are decent people, and I'll be reading this letter that they wrote in 1948, co-wrote with Einstein. There are decent people who are calling out this genocide for what it is. Norman Finkelstein, Max Blumenthal, Gabor Mate, what's her name? There are others, and but they don't have the control of the narrative. That is the issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a letter that was written to the New York Times in 1948 in its entirety, and then I'll make a couple of comments on it. So this is the letter. Among the most disturbing political phenomena of our time is the emergence of the newly created State of Israel of the quote-unquote Freedom Party, a political party closely akin in its organization, methods, political philosophy, and social appeal to the Nazi and fascist parties. It was formed out of the membership and following of the former Irgun Tzvi Leumi, a terrorist, right-wing, chauvinist organization in Palestine. The current visit of Menachem Begin, leader of this party, to the United States is obviously calculated to give the impression of American support for his party in the coming Israeli elections, and to cement political ties with the conservative Zionist elements in the United States. Notice, cement the political ties with conservative Zionist elements. Several Americans of national repute have lent their names to welcome his visit. It is inconceivable that those who oppose fascism throughout the world, if correctly informed as to Mr. Begin's political record and perspectives, could add their names in support to the movement he represents. Before irreparable damage is done by way of financial contributions, public manifestations in Begin's behalf, and in the creation in Palestine of the impression that a large segment of America supports fascist elements in Israel, the American public must be informed as to the record and objectives of Mr. Begin and his movement. The public avowals of Begin's party are no guide whatsoever to its actual character. Today they speak of freedom, democracy, and anti-imperialism, whereas until recently they openly preached the doctrine of the fascist state. It is in its actions that the terrorist party betrays its real character. From its past actions, we can judge what it may be expected to do in the future. An attack on an Arab village. A shocking example was their behavior in the Arab village of Deir Yassin. This village, off the main roads and surrounded by Jewish lands, had taken no part in the war and had even fought off Arab bands who wanted to use the village as their base. On April 9th, the New York Times, terrorist bands attacked this peaceful village, which was not a military objective in the fighting, killed most of its inhabitants, 240 men, women, and children, and kept a few of them alive to parade as captives through the streets of Jerusalem. Most of the Jewish community was horrified at the deed. Think about that. Back then, they were horrified of the deed. Now they are applauding it. And the Jewish Agency sent a telegram of apology to King Abdullah of Transjordan. But the terrorists, far from being ashamed of their act, were proud of this massacre, publicized it widely, and invited all the foreign correspondents present in the country to view the heaped corpses and the general havoc at Deir Yassin. The Deir Yassin incident exemplifies the character and actions of the quote-unquote Freedom Party. Within the Jewish community, they have preached an admixture of ultranationalism, religious mysticism, and racial superiority. Like other fascist parties, they have been used to break strikes and have themselves pressed for the destruction of free trade unions. In their stead, they have proposed corporate unions on the Italian fascist model. During the last years of sporadic anti-British violence, the IZL and Stern groups inaugurated a reign of terror in the Palestine Jewish community. Teachers were beaten up for speaking against them. Adults were shot for not letting their children join them. By gangster methods, beatings, window smashing, and widespread robberies, the terrorists intimidated the population and exacted a heavy tribute. The people of the Freedom Party have had no part in the constructive achievements in Palestine. They have reclaimed no land, built no settlements, and only distracted from the Jewish defense activity. Their much publicized immigration endeavors were minute and devoted mainly to bringing in fascist compatriots. The discrepancies between the bold claims now being made by Begin and his party, this is again in 1948, and their record of past performance in Palestine bear the imprint of no ordinary political party. This is the unmistakable stamp of a fascist party for whom terrorism against Jews, Arabs, and British alike, and the misrepresentation are means, and a quote-unquote leader state is the goal. In the light of foregoing considerations, it is imperative that the truth about Mr. Begin and his movement be made known in this country. It is all the more tragic that the top leadership of American Zionism has refused to campaign against Begin's efforts, even to expose to its own constituents the dangers to Israel from support to Begin. The undersigned, therefore, take this means of publicly presenting a few salient facts concerning Begin and his party, and of urging all concerned not to support this latest manifestation of fascism. And it's co-signed by, there's 27 signers, including Albert Einstein. Sidney Hook was very well-known Jewish intellectual. Hannah Arendt, who was the predominant chronicler of the Holocaust during World War II. And so this is a letter that was written to the New York Times. What I find quite interesting and disturbing is the fact that it was, and I'm going to include a link to it in the description, a clipping from the newspaper. And it wasn't a front page article, which it should have been. It was consigned to, an article that was just, it wasn't even an article, it was just a letter. So back then, you could see the kind of tentacles of this, this fascist Zionist movement were gaining control of the narrative back in 1948. And, there was a lot of people, a lot of the Jewish community didn't want to go to Israel. They had no interest in it because they felt that they were, comfortable where they were. And of course, in Europe, the Jewish community was decimated by the fascists and the Nazis during World War II. But a lot of other people were destroyed. There's 6 million Polish people were killed, 27 million Russians. Many of them are not Jewish. They were Slavic and Russian Orthodox. So it was not like the Jews were the only people who suffered in World War II. And yet, as Norman Finkelstein has pointed out, the so-called Holocaust industry has painted the Jews as the sole victims, and the world owes them a living. So this is the dysfunction that has been going on literally since 1948. This is the 77th anniversary of that letter, and here we are. Now, a couple of years ago, I went to a resort. I was practicing yoga, and I wanted to go to this resort, which happened to be owned by Israelis. And there was one particular young Israeli guy. Of course, most people are younger than me, but there was this one guy, and we were talking about the idea of truth. And I said to him, truth is very important. And he said, I don't want to know the truth because the truth is painful. I want to be blissfully ignorant. And I just thought, this is 2022, okay, 1 year before all hell broke loose. But that hell has been brewing for 77 years, starting with more than one massacre. Deir Yassin, that village, is just one. And of course, there were many others. There was an expulsion of 700,000 or more Palestinians from their homeland after the state of Israel was founded, and that was by terror tactics against the Palestinians. They were told, leave now and then you can come back. And then they weren't allowed to come back. So this is the nature of the Zionist regime in Israel. It really needs to be called out. And you have people like Max Blumenthal and Norman Finkelstein and others who are doing that. But I felt that I wanted to add my voice to that because I cannot possibly support what has been going on. And the worst part of it is that it puts the whole world at risk, because when you have this kind of regime that is threatening everybody, it's not just the Gaza, which is, a complete catastrophe for the people living there, but it's got spread to the West Bank, which the Israeli government doesn't even want to call the West Bank, doesn't even want to consider it as Palestinian territory. They do whatever they want, and the U.S. supports them in it. But they've attacked Lebanon continually for years. They just launched, a major attack against Iran, and but the problem is that this is a country that has a quite small population in a small geographical area, and they do everything they can to antagonize all of their neighbors, and then paint an image of themselves as the victim, even though they're the ones who are causing the problem. Why can't they just get along with everybody? Why couldn't they just given the Palestinians and said, you are our brothers. You've been living here for centuries. We're here as refugees from a terrible situation in Europe, but let's work together and build a country together. No, they couldn't do that because they're fascists. And so that's what I want to talk about. I think it's really important that people understand, the nature of this whole Israeli regime, and the fact that whenever somebody says, "Oh, October 7th, the Hamas was so terrible," that what happened there, the Larry Johnson has pointed out that 20 times more Palestinians have been killed over the course of the history than Israelis. So it's hardly a one-sided picture here by any stretch of the imagination. So I thought it was important for me to bring this up, and I want people to understand that if you ever get into a discussion with anybody and they say, "Oh, those Palestinians," just say, "I read Einstein's letter to the New York Times, December 2nd, 1948." And you'll know everything you need to know about the nature of the Israeli government nowadays. And unfortunately, they've had such a lock on the narrative, not just in Israel, where 80% or more of the people support the atrocities that have been ongoing, and getting worse over the course of the last 77 years, but they control the U.S. government. Fortunately, there are some people who are waking up, and especially even within the Jewish community, there are people who are very upset about all this. But the problem is that within the Jewish community itself, there's tremendous splits. So, one other aspect of this is people say, all the rotten Jewish. You've got Larry Fink of BlackRock, and there was Ivan Boesky in the 1980s who was using junk bonds as a scam, and Bernie Madoff. You got all these Jewish capitalists who are just screwing everybody, not to mention the Rothschilds and the Schiffs. And these are people who are actually financing Hitler because all they care is making money. But who suffers is the average person, and many of the Jews, really, when I was growing up, they had no idea about this. Fortunately, the internet has made this information available. So it's up to all of us to spread this information so that we can, somehow, bring this nightmare of disinformation and abuse under control. So that's what I want to say, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me. And I'll talk to you soon.